How to heal yourself. Have you ever noticed that no matter how many people love you, there is a room inside you that stays locked, a room no one else has ever been allowed to enter? Some pain grows quieter when someone listens. A hand on your shoulder can make a hard night easier to survive. But there is a floor beneath every human heart that no visitor can reach, no matter how much they love you, no matter how long they stay. Others can sit beside you while you cry. They can offer their honesty, their patience, their arms. But they cannot walk into the part of you that is still frightened, still small, still waiting. Only you can do that. And the moment you stop asking someone else to do it for you is the moment healing actually begins. According to Carl Jung, to heal does not mean to close yourself off from love, and it does not mean rejecting the people who care about you. Healing means something quieter than that. It means slowly, patiently taking back the center of yourself that you once handed to someone else without realizing it. If you find that you cannot rest unless a certain person is near you, if you find yourself needing someone to change before you can feel calm, if your sense of worth rises and falls depending on whether someone approves of you, then somewhere inside, an old wound is still steering the wheel. Self-healing begins in a much smaller, much less dramatic place than we imagine. It begins when you are willing to sit with your own feelings instead of outsourcing them. It begins when you start listening to what your unconscious has been trying to tell you for years. It begins when you become, for yourself, the steady presence you have been searching for in everyone else. Tonight, we are going somewhere that not every video is willing to go. We are going to the deepest layer of the healing process, the layer where your peace stops depending on who walks into your life and who walks out of it. Through the lens of Carl Jung, you will come to understand that learning not to depend on anyone does not mean learning to live alone. It means learning to love other people without disappearing into them. If you stay with us until the end, you may come to see that the healing you have been waiting for was never going to arrive through someone else's door. It was always going to arrive the day you became brave enough to become the peace you had spent your whole life searching for. Number 1. Why you are still waiting for someone to heal you. If you are honest with yourself, and truly honest takes more courage than most people expect, you may notice that you are not simply waiting for someone to love you. You are waiting for them to quiet the noise inside your chest. You are waiting for them to fill a space that has been empty for longer than you can remember. You are waiting for them to stand guard over old wounds, so those wounds do not reopen in the silence of an ordinary evening. This waiting rarely calls itself by its true name. We do not usually say, "I am dependent." We say something gentler. We say, "I just haven't met the right person yet." We tell ourselves that if we are heard closely enough and stayed with long enough, the ache will finally settle. Carl Jung once wrote that people will do almost anything, however absurd, to avoid looking directly at their own soul. He did not mean that people who need others are weak. Jung saw something far more delicate than that. He understood that sometimes what looks like a search for love is actually a search for a way around something. Not around the person in front of us, but around the unfinished parts of ourselves we have never had the courage to face. It is far more comforting to hope that someone else will make the pain disappear than to admit that the wound has been alive inside us the whole time, quietly shaping how we feel, what we choose, and what we believe we deserve. I think of a woman I once knew named Nora. She had one of those personalities people describe as easy, agreeable, low maintenance, the kind of person nobody ever worries about. In her relationships, Nora gave far more than she ever asked for in return. She rarely told anyone what actually hurt her in return. She rarely told anyone what actually hurt her, because somewhere inside, she believed that if she became even slightly inconvenient, the people she loved would begin to drift. And yet, no matter how carefully she kept the peace, the smallest things could undo her. a text left unanswered for a few hours, a friend who canceled plans without much explanation, a voice on the phone that sounded a little flatter than usual. Any of these could leave her anxious for the rest of the day, replaying the moment over and over, searching for what she might have done wrong. Nora once admitted that all she had ever wanted was someone who could make her feel safe without her having to ask. But the same anxious feeling kept returning no matter who she was with, and eventually she began to suspect that the feeling had never really belonged to the people standing in front of her. As a child, Nora had learned to read the moods of the adults around her the way sailors read the sky before a storm. She learned when it was safe to speak and when it was wiser to stay quiet. She learned which emotions were welcome in her house and which ones made the room feel colder. As an adult, without ever choosing to, she kept doing the same thing, scanning the people around her to find out whether she was allowed to feel at peace. From Jung's perspective, our earliest experiences do not vanish simply because years have passed. They sink beneath the surface of memory and become patterns that quietly direct our reactions long after we have forgotten where they came from. A child who only felt secure when the adults around her were calm may grow into an adult who becomes unusually sensitive to any hint of emotional distance. A child who learned that love had to be earned through good behavior may grow into an adult who believes that to be kept close, she must never ask for too much. When these old beliefs remain unexamined, we are not simply looking for love. We are unconsciously auditioning people for the role of the one who will finally rewrite the story. We hope they will always be near, so we no longer fear being left. We hope they will always understand us, so we no longer feel invisible. We hope they will always affirm us, so we no longer question our own worth. On the surface, this looks like wanting to be loved, and it is. But underneath, something else has quietly taken place. The other person has become the condition on which our sense of safety depends. We believe we are searching for healing, but sometimes what we are actually searching for is simply company for our pain, so that we are not left alone with it. Staying with our own feelings has never come easily to anyone. It requires us to look at the fear, the emptiness, and the unanswered questions that have been buried for years under advice, distraction, or the comforting presence of somebody else. When another person is near us, we feel lighter for a while. But that lightness is not proof that anything inside us has actually changed. It only proves that, for the moment, we are not carrying the weight alone. Picture someone who has spent years walking through storms beneath an umbrella held by other people. Whenever someone is beside them, they feel dry and protected. But because they have never once held the umbrella themselves, the instant that person walks away, the rain feels unbearable, as though the sky itself had turned against them. The problem was never the weather. The problem was never even the person who once sheltered them. What leaves them feeling so powerless is that, for years, they grew used to standing beneath somebody else's protection, and quietly forgot that their own two hands were capable of holding something too. This is why so many people carry the same anxiety through completely different relationships, different faces, different names, and the same familiar ache. They keep hoping this time will be different, that this person will finally be patient enough, steady enough, understanding enough to walk them out of the dark. But when your peace depends entirely on someone else's presence, it will always rise and fall with them. When they get busy, you get anxious. When they change, you panic. When they leave, your whole inner world seems to lose its floor. It is not because they took your peace with them when they left. It is because long before that moment, you had already placed it quietly in their hands. Jung never dismissed the value of companionship. A loyal friend, a healthy relationship, an honest therapist. These things matter, and they can help us see clearly what we have never been able to see alone. But no one, however devoted, can live your inner life for you. They can sit beside you in your pain. They can offer you a new way of seeing things. They can remind you that you are not as alone as you feel. But they cannot step into your unconscious and finish the work that only you are equipped to do. We keep waiting for someone to heal us, and it is rarely because we are weak. It is usually because, somewhere along the way, we learned that peace was something delivered by another person's hand, not something we were allowed to build ourselves. As long as that belief keeps operating quietly in the background, every new relationship can end up carrying the same old expectation. The hope that this time, someone will finally make us stop being afraid, stop doubting, and stop having to look at the most painful rooms inside ourselves. There is something almost tender in how quietly this pattern operates. It rarely announces itself. It does not arrive wearing the label of dependence, because dependence sounds like weakness, and most of us who carry it have spent years being told we are strong, capable, easy to be around. So instead, it disguises itself as loyalty. It disguises itself as devotion. It disguises itself as simply being a good partner, a good friend, a good daughter or son. And because it wears such acceptable clothing, we rarely think to question it, even as it slowly reshapes every relationship we enter. We do not notice that we have started reading someone's tone the way a meteorologist reads a pressure system, searching for the smallest shift before it becomes a storm. We do not notice that our own mood has quietly become a mirror of someone else's, rising when they are warm, falling when they seem distant, with almost no weather system of its own. This is not a character flaw. It is an old survival strategy that once made perfect sense and simply never learned that the danger it was built to avoid is no longer standing in the room. If anything in this section has made you recognize a piece of yourself, take a moment before moving forward. Sit with what you have just heard. Ask yourself honestly what you have been quietly waiting for someone else to give you. This is not an invitation to blame yourself for having needed people. It is an invitation to understand why your sense of peace became so easily tied to someone else's presence, someone else's mood, someone else's choices. If you feel ready, leave a few words in the comments about what you have been waiting for someone else to do for far too long. Naming it correctly, even in a single sentence, is often the exact moment real healing quietly begins. Number 2, the door within can only be opened by you. Once you stop expecting someone else to make your pain disappear, you begin to understand the limits of companionship far more clearly than before. Someone can listen to you. Someone can help you notice things about yourself you had never seen. Someone can walk beside you through your hardest days. But no one can go back into the memories you keep avoiding, name the emotions you have spent years denying, or choose differently on your behalf. When an old pattern resurfaces, and it always does, there is a stretch of the road that has to be walked alone. This is not because healing was ever meant to be lonely. It is because transformation only becomes permanent when it starts on the inside. Carl Jung once wrote that there is no arrival at consciousness without pain. Awareness does not appear simply because we heard good advice at the right moment. It forms when we finally become brave enough to look directly at an uncomfortable truth, and then remain with that truth longer than our instincts want us to. At this point, pain stops being something we are only trying to get rid of. It becomes a signal, a sign that some part of us is asking, quietly and patiently, to finally be seen. There is an old story about the goddess Psyche, who was given a set of tasks so impossible that they seemed designed to break her. She was told to sort an enormous mountain of mixed grain into separate piles before nightfall, an impossible task for any single pair of hands. As she stood staring at the pile in despair, a colony of ants appeared and quietly began sorting the grain beside her, seed by seed, until the work was done. Later, she was told to gather golden wool from dangerous rams, and a reed by the river whispered to her the safest way to do it without being harmed. Later still, she was sent into the underworld itself to retrieve a box that was never meant for mortal hands. Each time, something outside of her offered guidance, a whisper, a nudge, a piece of wisdom she could not have reached alone. But not one of those helpers did the walking for her. The ants did not carry her into the underworld. The reed did not face the rams in her place. Psyche still had to descend, still had to carry the box herself, still had to be the one who opened it, even after she was warned not to. Seen through a Jungian lens, Psyche's trials are a portrait of the unconscious itself, layered, unpredictable, and impossible to sort through using willpower alone. The mountain of grain is every mixed and tangled feeling inside you that seems too enormous to separate on your own. The descent into the underworld is the part of healing where you have to walk into your own darkness, guided but never carried. Others can offer you a whisper, the way the reed whispered to Psyche. A friend, a book, a therapist, a video like this one. But they cannot walk that road in your place, because the road only exists inside you. This is also how real psychotherapy actually works. A good therapist does not live your life for you, and does not hand you a formula that erases pain on contact. What they offer is a safe enough space for you to notice your patterns, name your feelings, and begin to see your own story with clearer eyes. But change only becomes real when you carry that awareness back into your ordinary days, when you catch yourself about to react out of an old habit and choose something different instead, even though the old habit would have been easier. You can be told 100 times that you have value, but those words only settle into you once you stop staying in situations that keep making you doubt it. You can understand intellectually that you are allowed to set a boundary, but the boundary only becomes real the first time you tolerate the guilt that shows up right after you finally say no. Awareness can be sparked by words. It only becomes wisdom through experience that you actually live yourself. There is a particular kind of frustration that comes from understanding your own patterns perfectly on paper while still living them out in practice. You can explain in precise detail why you struggle to set boundaries. You can trace the exact childhood moment where the pattern was born. You can even describe, with real insight, what a healthier version of yourself would say in a difficult conversation. And yet, when the actual conversation arrives, the old pattern moves faster than the insight does. This is not a failure of understanding. It is simply proof that understanding and embodiment are two different achievements, built through two entirely different kinds of practice. One happens in the mind. The other happens in the moment your hands are shaking and you choose to speak anyway. Healing is a little like an old wooden instrument left untouched in a quiet room. Someone else can tune its strings. Someone else can set it in the stillest, safest corner of the house. Someone else can even teach you how to listen. But sound only exists once the string itself begins to vibrate. No one can make that string move on your behalf. If every shift in you comes only from an outside voice, it fades the moment that voice goes quiet. But when something is genuinely understood from within, it becomes a kind of knowledge that circumstance cannot easily strip away from you. This is why so many people read every self-help book they can find, watch countless hours of healing content, and can explain the exact psychological origin of their wounds in perfect detail, and yet their lives keep repeating the same patterns anyway. They have stood at the edge of the underworld, holding every piece of guidance anyone has ever offered them, and they have still not taken the first step down. Knowledge can tell you exactly where you are standing. It cannot replace the moment you actually choose to live differently from what your unconscious keeps pulling you toward, out of habit. Understanding that you fear abandonment is useful. Refusing to abandon your own needs in order to keep someone close is where the real transformation quietly begins. The door within can only be opened by you, because only you know what makes you contract inward when no one is watching. Only you know what sits quietly beneath your calm expression, what is still waiting, patiently, to be acknowledged. Others can see the outline of your struggle. They cannot feel its full weight. And they certainly cannot decide, on your behalf, when it is finally time to walk through a fear, release a role you have outgrown, or stop repeating a choice that once helped you survive, but now only carries you further from yourself. None of this makes healing a lonely road. Psyche's helpers still mattered. The ants still sorted the grain. The reed still offered its warning. The right kind of companionship does not take the responsibility away from you. It helps you become steady enough to hold that responsibility yourself. Someone who genuinely loves you will not force the door open for you. They will simply stay close enough that you know, without needing to be told, that you are capable of opening it without walking into the dark completely alone. If you want somewhere to begin tonight, choose one feeling that keeps returning to you. Something familiar, something that shows up again and again, no matter how much life around you changes. Spend just a few quiet minutes with it each day this week. Name exactly what it is. Write down what seemed to trigger it, and notice your very first reaction without rushing to correct or explain it away. Do not ask immediately how to make it disappear. Simply let yourself recognize, this is what is happening inside me right now. Every time you do this, you are holding your own thread a little more firmly, taking one more step toward the room that no one else has ever been able to enter for you. That door does not open because someone finally gave you the perfect piece of advice, and it does not open because the right person finally walked into your life. It opens slowly, quietly, the moment you stop turning away from what your own inner world has been trying to show you all along. From that point forward, healing is no longer something you sit and wait to receive. It becomes something you are actively living. Number 3, reclaiming the authority you gave to others. Once that door begins to open, even slightly, a harder question arrives right behind it. Will you trust what you see inside, or will you still wait for someone else to confirm that what you feel is valid before you allow yourself to believe it? This is where the work becomes more delicate. You may already understand, quite clearly, what you need and what has been draining you for years, and yet you may still hesitate to act on it until somebody else nods along in agreement. Slowly, without meaning for it to happen, other people's reactions become the traffic signals you use to decide whether to move forward, stop where you are, or turn back the way you came. Meanwhile, your own inner voice is only allowed to speak when it happens not to disturb anyone. A woman who watches this channel once wrote in, sharing that for most of her adult life, she found it almost impossible to make an important decision without checking it against the opinions of everyone around her first. Before switching careers, she consulted her parents. Before ending a friendship that had grown one-sided, she asked 3 different people what they thought she should do. Even something as small as wanting a weekend alone had to be quietly approved by someone else before she allowed herself to enjoy it. For years, she believed this made her thoughtful, even wise. But the more opinions she collected, the less certain she became about anything, because every single person she asked was viewing her life through the narrow window of their own fears and their own history, not hers. What finally woke her up was not one large decision. It was the quiet realization that she had spent years constructing a life that kept everyone else comfortable, while she herself grew steadily more exhausted. She had stayed in a job everyone called stable, remained in a relationship because nothing about the other person was obviously wrong, and repeatedly swallowed a heaviness in her chest because she was terrified of ever being called ungrateful. She wrote, "I have been asking other people how to live my life for so long that I genuinely do not know which voice inside me is actually mine anymore." This is how a person's inner authority is usually given away. It rarely happens in one dramatic moment. It happens through hundreds of smaller ones, each time you push your own feelings aside to keep somebody else comfortable. You know quietly that you do not want something, and you say yes anyway. You feel hurt, and you tell yourself you are simply being too sensitive. You sense that something no longer fits your life, and you stay because everyone around you insists it is the right choice. After enough of these small surrenders, nobody needs to control you directly anymore. Their expectations have already taken up permanent residence inside your own mind. Carl Jung once observed that everything that irritates you about another person can become a mirror, showing you something about yourself you had not yet understood. The reactions that shake you the most do not only reveal how someone else has treated you, they also reveal exactly where you still do not fully trust yourself. Someone's disapproval can be enough to make you abandon a choice entirely, not necessarily because they are right, but because part of you is still terrified of being responsible if things do not turn out the way you hoped. A single disappointed look from someone you love can pull you straight back into an old role, because somewhere underneath, you still equate being loved with keeping everyone around you satisfied. From a Jungian perspective, maturity does not mean you stop listening to anyone else's voice completely. It means learning to take in many different voices without letting any single one of them replace your own. You are still allowed to ask for advice. You are still allowed to consider what other people think, and even admit when you might be wrong. But after all of that listening, you eventually have to come back to your own lived experience and ask yourself a much more honest question. Does this choice bring me closer to the person I actually want to become, or does it simply make me easier for everyone else to accept? Imagine your life as a radio, and your inner voice as a single, quiet frequency that only you can naturally tune into. Everyone around you has their own station they would prefer you listen to instead. Your family wants you tuned to the frequency of caution. Your friends want you tuned to whatever keeps the group comfortable. The person you love may want you tuned to whatever keeps them feeling secure. Each of these frequencies is louder than your own, and each one keeps drowning out the signal you were actually born with. Reclaiming your authority does not mean throwing away the radio, and it does not mean refusing to ever listen to another station again. It simply means learning to turn the dial back to your own frequency often enough that you can recognize it immediately, even in a room full of noise. That return does not always feel like freedom right away. At first, it often feels like guilt. People who are used to being consulted may start to feel that you have grown distant. People who are used to you giving in may quietly accuse you of having changed. You might feel unsettled too, because once you are making your own choices, there is no longer anyone else to blame if the outcome disappoints you. But this is exactly where real responsibility begins to take shape. Not the responsibility to live a flawless life, but the responsibility to actually be present inside the one you are living. Reclaiming your authority does not mean you have to defend every decision forever. Sometimes you will look back and realize you were wrong, and you will need to change direction. The difference now is that you change course because you can finally see more clearly, not because you are terrified of letting someone else down. You can hear criticism without turning it into a verdict on your worth. You can feel hurt by being misunderstood without immediately abandoning what you know to be true. You can also accept that not everyone who loves you will fully understand the path you are walking. When your inner authority returns, you stop using every reaction from the outside world as the only measurement of your value. Praise can still bring you joy, but it no longer determines whether you matter. Rejection can still sting, but it no longer forces you to question your entire existence. Approval becomes a welcome gift instead of the oxygen you cannot survive without. Advice becomes something you consider, not something you obey. And another person's disagreement stops automatically meaning you have made the wrong choice. Slowly, the question, "What will everyone think?" begins to give way to a deeper and far more honest one. What happens to me if I keep living against what I actually feel? Thank you for staying with this journey through its first half. Before we continue, take a few seconds and answer honestly, even if only to yourself. When was the last time you clearly knew what you wanted and chose according to someone else's expectations instead? If you feel ready, you can share that memory in the comments as a small way of finally letting the voice you once silenced be heard, even by you. Sometimes your inner authority does not come back through one dramatic decision. It comes back through the quiet moment you finally start trusting that what you feel on the inside is worth respecting too. Number 4, staying with the pain instead of continuing to run away. The moment you begin steering your own life again is often the very same moment old emotions, ones you had pushed far beneath the surface, start rising back into view. In the past, you might have kept yourself endlessly busy so you would not have to sit with your thoughts. You might have found someone new to fill the emptiness. You might have simply kept moving forward, faster and faster, so you would never have to glance back at what was left unfinished behind you. But once those old strategies stop working, you begin to realize that the pain never actually disappeared. It was only waiting, patiently, for the day you finally grew still enough not to run the moment it reappeared. Very few people admit, even to themselves, that they are running. We simply throw ourselves further into work. We scroll a little longer than we mean to. We rush into new relationships before the last one has finished teaching us anything. We tell ourselves the past is over, and that we no longer need to feel anything about it. Some people even turn their old wounds into a kind of armor, presenting themselves as though nothing could ever touch them again. These strategies can help us keep functioning day to day, but continuing to function is not the same thing as being transformed on the inside. Sometimes what drains us most is not even the original wound itself, but the constant, quiet effort it takes to keep that wound hidden from view. There is an old teaching story about the Buddha on the night before his awakening, sitting beneath a tree, determined not to move until he understood the truth of his own suffering. As the night grew darker, a figure named Mara appeared before him, sending wave after wave of temptation, doubt, and fear, each one designed to make him rise from his seat and walk away. Mara sent visions of desire to distract him. Mara sent visions of terror to frighten him. Mara sent whispering doubts, telling him he had no right to sit there at all, that he was not worthy of the peace he was seeking. Every instinct in the story urges him to stand, to leave, to escape into anything other than staying exactly where he was. But he does not move. He remains seated through every wave Mara sends. And it is precisely by staying, by refusing to run, that dawn finally arrives and brings his awakening with it. Seen through a Jungian lens, Mara is not so different from every voice inside us that insists we should get up and leave the moment discomfort arrives. The fear that whispers, "You are not ready." The doubt that insists you do not deserve peace. The old habit that tells you to distract yourself instead of sitting still. Staying with your pain does not mean becoming trapped inside it, and it does not mean treating your wound as the whole of who you are. It simply means no longer denying what is actually present the moment an uncomfortable feeling rises. Instead of telling yourself you should not still feel sad about something, you allow yourself to notice that the sadness is, in fact, still there. Instead of accusing yourself of being too sensitive, you start asking why a moment that seems small on the outside is landing on you with so much weight. Emotion only becomes able to reveal what it has been hiding once it stops being judged the instant it appears. There is also real science behind this. When we avoid an uncomfortable emotion, we often feel a flicker of relief. But that relief can quietly teach the nervous system that the feeling itself is dangerous, something to be feared rather than experienced. Each time we do this, even a small reminder of that emotion can cause a stronger reaction the next time it appears. But when a feeling is recognized and named honestly, within a safe enough moment, the nervous system slowly begins to settle because it is learning something new. It is learning that discomfort can be felt without being overwhelming. Picture your pain as an old envelope that arrived at your door a long time ago and has never once been opened. You can slide it into a drawer, you can bury it beneath other things and try to forget it exists at all. But the weight it carries does not come only from whatever words are written inside it. It also comes from the constant, quiet effort of remembering not to touch that drawer by accident. Only once you are calm enough to actually open the envelope can you finally see what you have been carrying all these years and understand what has been quietly calling your name from behind reactions that never seemed to make sense before. Sadness can show you what mattered enough to grieve. Anger can point directly at a boundary that was crossed. Fear can be trying to protect a part of you that has never once felt safe. Emotions do not always tell the whole truth of the present moment, but they almost always carry a trace worth listening to. Only once you stop rushing to push them away can you begin telling the difference between what is truly happening now and what is simply the echo of something that happened long ago. It helps to understand why the running feels so necessary in the first place. The mind is not trying to punish you when it reaches for distraction. It is trying to protect you, the same way it always has, by treating an old wound as though it were still a fresh injury that could overwhelm you completely if touched. This is why staying still can feel, at first, almost more frightening than the running itself. Your body may tense. Your breathing may shorten. Some old, wordless part of you may insist that if you stop moving even for a moment, something unbearable will finally catch up with you. But this is rarely true in the way it feels true. What usually catches up with you, when you finally slow down enough to let it, is not destruction. It is simply a feeling that has been waiting, patiently, for someone to finally notice it was there. Real change begins in that small, quiet pause between feeling something and acting on it. You can notice that you are afraid of being left without immediately clinging to someone to prevent it. You can notice that you are angry without turning that anger into a weapon against someone else. You can feel the emptiness without racing to fill it with a new relationship, more work, or another hour lost to a screen. The pain may still be there, but it no longer has the final word over every decision you make. Slowly, you begin to understand that your emotions are not appearing to punish you. Most of the time, they are simply guiding you back toward a part of yourself that got left behind during a moment that once felt too overwhelming to survive. The part of you that once had to stay quiet or stay small, or was never allowed to be angry or sad, does not need another round of judgment. What it needs is a presence steady enough to finally show it that this time, when it speaks, it will not be pushed aside again. Staying with your pain will not make everything lighter overnight, but it will help you stop living under the direction of the very things you have spent years trying to avoid. When you stop rushing to bury your feelings or fill the emptiness with something else, you begin to see yourself more clearly, and you begin to stay calmer in the presence of whatever is happening inside you. Pain stops being only something to escape. It becomes instead the place where you finally learn how to stay with yourself during your most vulnerable moments. Number 5, when self-healing helps you love without dependence. By the time you have learned to sit with your pain instead of fleeing from it, you may start to notice that this same shift has quietly changed the way you enter into love. In the past, you might have turned to another person for reassurance, for validation, or simply to fill a space that felt unbearably empty on your own. But once you have learned to hold yourself, you no longer place the entire weight of your inner peace onto someone else's shoulders. You can still long for closeness and still deeply want love, without carrying the belief that you would collapse without it. Dependence is often difficult to recognize, precisely because it can look almost identical to devotion. You might call constant waiting patience. You might call excessive self-sacrifice love. You might interpret the fear of losing someone as proof of how deeply you care for them. But underneath all of this, there is sometimes a quiet, unspoken belief that you only have value when someone else chooses you. That belief is exactly why a delayed reply or a slightly colder tone of voice can be enough to make you feel that someone's affection is slipping away. In everyday life, some people fall quietly apart whenever the person they love simply becomes busy for a while. They check their phone again and again. They reread old messages, searching for some sign of what might have gone wrong. Because they are afraid of appearing needy, they say nothing about what they actually feel. Instead, they try to become gentler, more agreeable, less trouble to be around. From the outside, everything looks calm. On the inside, they are constantly watching the other person's behavior, trying to determine whether they are still loved. It is usually only once the exhaustion becomes impossible to keep ignoring that they finally start looking inward instead of outward. What they often discover is that the other person's ordinary business had merely brushed against a fear that was already living inside them, the fear that distance will always end in abandonment. From that point of recognition, they can slowly begin returning to the parts of their life that had quietly gone neglected, their work, their friendships, the small joys they used to make time for. When anxiety rises now, they no longer reach immediately for another message in search of reassurance. The discomfort is still there, but they gradually learn they can move through it without pulling the other person closer at any cost. Carl Jung once observed that where love truly rules, the need to control disappears, and wherever control dominates, real love has already begun to fade. A genuine connection is not a place where one person keeps shrinking themselves to hold on to the other. It is a place where two people can be fully seen, can face their own limitations honestly, and can grow through the relationship together, rather than merely surviving it. Love does more than offer comfort. It also brings unconscious fears to the surface, parts of us we rarely notice when we are alone. From a Jungian perspective, we sometimes believe we are reacting to the person standing in front of us, when a much older part of us is actually reacting to something far in the past. A moment of silence in the present can brush against a memory we thought we had long forgotten. A small, ordinary rejection can awaken the old feeling that we were never quite important enough to begin with. Healing begins when you can recognize this happening and stop asking the person you love to take responsibility for wounds they had no part in creating. Recognizing this pattern does not mean you will suddenly feel calm in every situation. You may still feel sad when someone you love grows distant. You may still feel disappointed when your needs are not met, and afraid of losing something that matters deeply to you. But now, a small pause begins to appear between the feeling and the reaction. You can feel anxious without immediately clinging. You can feel hurt without instantly deciding that you are unworthy of love. That pause is what allows you to respond from where you actually are, instead of repeating an old reaction out of habit. Picture two trees planted a short distance apart in an open field. Each one has grown its own deep, independent root system, strong enough to hold steady through any storm on its own. They can lean toward each other in the wind. Their branches can even touch and tangle overhead. But if one tree were suddenly gone, the other would still be standing, still be rooted, still be whole. Now picture two vines instead, planted so close together that neither one ever learned to hold itself upright. They wrap around each other tightly, and for a while, it looks almost like closeness. But if you tried to separate them, both would simply collapse, because neither one ever developed the strength to stand alone. Self-healing is the slow, patient work of growing your own roots, so that love becomes something two whole trees choose to share, rather than something two collapsing vines desperately need from each other in order to remain upright. It is worth pausing here to say plainly what this is not. Loving without dependence is not the same as building a wall and calling it wisdom. Some people, once they glimpse how much of their old love was built on fear, swing hard in the opposite direction, deciding it is safer to need nothing from anyone ever again. That is not healing. That is simply a different kind of hiding, dressed up in the language of independence. True self-reliance does not close the door on closeness. It makes closeness possible without the underlying terror that closeness might disappear. The goal was never to feel nothing when someone you love pulls away. The goal is to feel it fully and still remain standing. As you grow steadier within yourself, you also begin giving other people permission to be ordinary and imperfect. They are allowed to grow tired. They are allowed to need time alone. They are allowed to fail to understand everything you are feeling, without that failure meaning the relationship itself is broken. This does not mean tolerating disrespect or accepting indifference. You still know exactly what you need, where your boundaries live, and when it is time to walk away from something that has stopped being healthy for you. The difference now is that you choose from a place of clarity, rather than from the fear that you could not survive on your own. Loving without dependence does not mean you no longer need anyone. You still need connection. You still need to be understood. You still need to matter to someone else. What changes is that their presence stops being the only proof that you are worthy of love. You can lean on someone when you are tired without handing them the entire weight of your life to carry. You can love deeply while still holding on to your own voice, your own boundaries, and the parts of yourself that make you who you are. Tomorrow morning, when you wake, all you need to do is sit quietly for a few minutes and ask yourself an honest question. Today, am I choosing to love out of sincerity or out of the fear of losing something? Then choose one small action based on whatever answer surfaces. Maybe it means finally expressing a need instead of suffering through it silently. Maybe it means resisting the urge to send another message that only exists to soothe your own anxiety. Maybe it simply means spending time on your work, your body, or the small joys that belong entirely to you. Every time you do this, you remind the deepest part of yourself that closeness and freedom are not opposites, that love can exist right alongside your own independence, without either one having to disappear. Healing does not make you love people any less. It simply teaches you how to love them, without continuing to abandon yourself in the process. As this journey comes to a close, you may now understand something that is easy to miss along the way. Healing yourself does not mean learning to live without needing anyone at all. We are human beings, and human beings need love, need understanding, need hands to hold when we are tired. What actually matters is that you no longer hand your entire sense of peace over to someone else's presence or someone else's choices. Other people can walk beside you. They can light small sections of the path. They can help you notice what was once hidden from your own view. But the deepest room within you still requires that you, and only you, walk in with honesty and with patience. Through the lens of Carl Jung, healing occurs the moment what was once hidden is slowly brought back into the light of your own awareness. You stop blaming yourself for having once been vulnerable. You stop treating pain as evidence of failure, and you begin to listen instead to what your emotions have been trying to tell you all along. Inner stability, when it finally forms, does so very slowly and almost silently. But once it takes root, it becomes strong enough that you no longer lose yourself so easily every time life shifts beneath your feet. So, if everything still feels unclear tonight, give yourself more time. Some transformations do not arrive all at once. They unfold so quietly you barely notice them happening, and yet they slowly change the way you see yourself and the way you move through even the most difficult days. If this video has meant something to you, please take a moment to like it, subscribe to the channel, and continue this journey with us. Because real self-healing begins the moment you stop waiting for someone else to lead you out of the dark and start learning patiently how to be that light for yourself.